On the line with us is Dr. Richard Fisher, who is currently with, it looks like, a new think tank. Rick, good morning. Welcome to the John Fredericks Radio Network.
Good morning. Yes, I've been with the International Assessment and Strategy Center, okay. And thank you for having me on the show this morning.
That was a little requiem for our friend, Admiral James Ace Lyons, and I wanted to bring you on a little early this morning just to talk about it. He passed away on December 12th, great American patriot, and you wrote some op-eds with him in the Washington Times. Rick, tell us a little bit about James Ace Lyons.
Well, first, let me say that I never had the honor of serving under Admiral Lyons, but I have known him for close to 2 decades.
Wow. And
if the call went out to Central Casting for Admiral, you would come back with Ace Lyons. Mm-hmm. He was a larger-than-life personality that filled the room, and you understood immediately who was in charge and which way you had to pack up and go. But that said, he was also a very generous person, always willing to listen to a new perspective, and never flinching in his desire to do what he could to defend the United States of America. His long career in the Navy, 36 years, was followed by a just as brilliant career in the private sector and in the public eye, working for his own consulting organization, various boards, his longtime association with the Center for Security Policy, and his willingness to, in a very rare way for a retired star rank officer, to regularly speak out and to try to convey the truth about threats to his beloved country.
Great man. We had him on a show a few times, and he was really fun to have on and very informative, brought a new perspective to the show, and in world affairs and what's happening in the Middle East. And he'll be greatly missed, I'm sure. And, many of the people who have been friends over the years and new friends, old friends, they're going to miss him. And I'm glad we have some stuff on YouTube with him. So from there, let's just segue right into Chinese power projection, which you spoke about last month at the Institute of World Politics. When I called you the other day, I said, gosh, the defense wants another $39 billion and we can't get a wall. And I think the budget right now sits at about $730 or $32 billion. And you said, Colonel Mike, we're going to need $1 trillion. So let's talk about it, Rick.
Well, let's start at the high point. About a little over a week ago, an article was published in a Chinese science magazine that revealed a new term. Mm-hmm. And essentially, the Chinese have given a name to their outer space ambitions. Mm-hmm. They are now calling essentially for a Chinese Earth-Moon economic zone.
Wow.
They are beginning to formulate strategies that link their domination on Earth with the domination of the Moon. This is an extreme form of power projection, but it is unfolding before our eyes. The Chinese may be right now in the midst of trying to very quickly recalibrate their manned space moon architecture to enable them to get to the moon before President Trump can organize NASA to get to the moon. Well, NASA is at this point looking at maybe getting to the moon at 2028 or after.
Oh, my gosh.
And the Chinese, if their new moon architecture comes together quickly, could potentially get there by 2025 or maybe sooner. And this undergirds the terrestrial Chinese ambition for global power projection. And there are two major concerns here. First is their buildup of a maritime and airborne power projection capability that will allow them to defend or assert interests around the globe, and at the same time, a fantastic projection of economic and political power with the goal of lining up military access and especially port access around the globe. Both of these projects are now well underway and are yielding results as we speak.
Well, I understand. Just the other day, it was in the paper. I think it's Nigeria or Uganda. One of these countries, they can't pay for the port, and now China pulled out the contract and said, "Well, we're going to get this, that, and the other thing." One of the African nations, and then also on Bloomberg this morning, they discussed this big signature between Turkey and China now on building the biggest joint airport to have the most travelers go through. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yes. The Chinese are involved in mega projects all around the world, especially in Latin America, where I expect they will be picking up naval access, air access, maybe even bases well within the next decade. But the African country you mentioned was Kenya.
Okay.
The Kenyans have discovered they're not able to pay their loans. They're looking for other money to do that. But if they can't come up with the payments, as the Chinese have started to do in other places, they will begin to negotiate for a bit of the actual capital, getting a piece of the port, perhaps the right to build an airfield right next to it, so that when they eventually do acquire the port, it'll have an airfield too.
I think a lot of these contracts are set up like that. Am I right, Rick, in saying that? Where the
countries that are receiving the loans, of course, are simply not aware of the Chinese end goal. And the Chinese, of course, try to make their goal as opaque as possible. And it's not until they have the money, they're on the hook, that the Chinese goal becomes apparent.
Boy, I tell you what, the American public are not aware. I've known you for almost, 22 years now. They're not aware of what's going on. You've been on top of China for years. And we just have a bunch of crazy people that serve in our government, called senators and congressmen, who look the other way, who keep on with this Russian collusion fake news story. And, I've always said it, I've called into the show before. When they hacked into OPM, Rick, just a couple of years ago, when Obama was president, nobody did anything. Democrats, Republicans alike. Nobody made a squawk like they're doing with Russia. And, they've compromised a lot of people. I think they have stuff on people in this country, which basically either blackmails or compromises them. And it's not going to get any better. I don't see it getting any better because, in essence, it's all about the trade and what your state is doing. You saw what happened recently with this past year with President Trump having the trade debate with China, and how the states like Iowa and in the Midwest, where they depend on selling pork bellies or soybeans, basically they're rebelling against the president and the U.S. administration's policies on trade, and it's all about the mighty dollar.
And the Chinese understand these pressure points and mobilized very quickly to turn Trump's trade war against him. I'm sure the president expected that this would happen,
mm-hmm.
and he deserves a great deal of credit for sticking to his guns and even escalating pressure against the Chinese where necessary. I read this morning in the Jerusalem Post that the administration has, for at least 8 months, been considering an emergency order, a total ban on the use of telecommunications and computer technologies from the Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE, which have been linked to very aggressive cyber espionage operations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I didn't read that, but I'm aware of the two countries and having these chips and, being able to spy within government or private sector. And, I mean, he's the only one that stood up to them, Rick. I mean, nobody wanted to stand up to the Chinese. It was a big trade deal, especially a lot of these congressional people within the House and the Senate, because it benefits their states and it also benefits their stock portfolios.
Well, President Trump understands that America needs to remain free in order for our companies to profit. And he doesn't really have to preach long and hard to American companies in China who have been subject to vast abuse for a long time. American companies are fleeing the Chinese market in droves, and President Trump at least doesn't have to fight them like previous presidents had to do in order to sustain any kind or take any initiative to get tough on the Chinese.
Oh, they decimated some of the American corporations, as far as I'm concerned, when they went there to set up, right? Where they, right down the street they have a competitor, and then they steal all the IP, and then, it's like, okay, you want to move it. Otherwise, whatever you want to do. And I think the American people should have been a lot stronger in their purchasing power. I understand we have a lot of companies making products there, but, you could make good decisions. You have other phone companies and other electric appliance companies that are operating in friendly countries, and you could have bought the products and did a little damage to the Chinese economy that way. But now it's all coming to roost. And, Rick, I want to say another thing. Years ago, I think it was 2006 or 2007, a friend of mine showed me a paper that he collected from a Harvard study. These contracts that you were just talking about with Kenya, any of this paper that was sold, this mortgage paper that was packaged before the collapse, there was certain wording inside of there that should this happen or collapse, China will not take the haircut on anything that they own as far as mortgages that were sold or packaged or repackaged throughout the banking system. And they were basically locked in to just take the land. That's a scary move. If it's true, that's a very scary move.
Well, this has been a successful Chinese strategy. It has worked for them so far in Sri Lanka, where they now own a large port, and it is suspected that they have similar deals with Pakistan, where they are also building a very large port and an adjoining airfield.
And when the Panama Canal was widening a few years back, there was a gentleman who was the maritime administrator. You remember Sean Connaughton, he was under G.W. Bush. He went down there with 16, 18 American companies to bid on the widening of the canal, and there was I think it was an Air Force fort, I forgot the name, but that was up for grabs, all these things that we built over the years in Panama. And our companies didn't bid on this stuff, Rick. Most of the guys who got the fort that was run by the Air Force, it was Singapore bid on it, $875,000. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. But we did get a portion of the widening. It was CH2M Hill, but everything else went to the Chinese. They came down there with bags of money, and the Americans just shied away from it. They didn't invest no money. Neither the there was no. This is what knocks me out. There's no XM kind of loans for American companies to go down there and do this work. But the Chinese have that package.
Yes, and that's why the Chinese are now in various stages of either planning or even starting to build over 5 wet and dry canals across either Central America or South America. Mm-hmm. So, if you can imagine the impact of one Panama Canal on the history of Latin America, the Chinese are now quadrupling that impact, and we're just sitting by and watching it happen.
Terrible news, Rick. And we have a Congress that's I don't know if I could say it on the air, but I think a lot of these people are either in the pocket, in the tank, blackmailed, whatever. They have all the information on them from OPM, from top to bottom. So I don't know. I really can't say it, and I don't know if I want to say it on the air, but I think a lot of them, they've been notified by the Chinese. And, it's not just the Democratic Party, Republican Party alike. Over the years, everybody takes trips, and the first trip you do when you're a congressperson, you go to Israel. The second trip, you go to China. Am I right? And whatever takes place within your district, and it's all about dollars, but in the end, it'll come back to bite us. And it's coming to fruition now, Rick.
There are some good people on Capitol Hill, and they're active. But in the House, of course, a different agenda starts unfolding on January 20th, mm-hmm. And the work is now going to be twice as hard to focus the proper attention on these challenges. But we have friends up there. We simply have to work with them, get them on your show, and get out the message.
Rick, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to wish you and your family a Happy New Year, and I hope to see you again soon and bring you back on the show right after the new Congress sets in, maybe the end of January, February. And I hope to see you right after New Year's.
Well, I thank you, and a Happy New Year to you and yours.
All right. God bless, Rick. Thank you. That was Rick Fisher, Dr. Rick Fisher, China specialist on Chinese and Asia security matters.